pull my pencils out and get my paper ready. So if you have a clean sheet of paper, you can go ahead and open up to it. And I'm going to be using, just for today, I'm going to be using a B pencil today. So loose drawing is basically an approach to sketching that gives you the effect of like this more relaxed drawing and kind of effortless drawing, right? And so by sketching loosely, and you can see some of the examples I have, you can kind of plan your composition and practice drawing without worrying about making mistakes. You're not focusing on details. To create the loose sketch, you're not thinking, like I said, you're not thinking about details. You're thinking about kind of that overall loose shape. And you can kind of see that in my drawing here. I have a vase of something on the table. It's not super detailed, but it's giving me kind of the idea. Now, I will say, whenever I create a drawing, I almost always start with one of these processes, whether it's loose drawing or gesture drawing. Actually, I always start with these processes. Whether it's loose drawing or gesture drawing, both of these processes, they help you find the line. And so it's good to start with one of these. And like I said, loose drawing is good when you're kind of doing an object, right? Gesture drawing is more focused on figures, and we'll talk about that in just a second. One of the tricks to loose drawing is how we hold the pencil. So typically when we draw or write, we hold our hand closer to that tip of the pencil. We have more control that way, right? We move our fingers, we sometimes move our wrist, and we can put a lot of pressure into it. We can get tiny marks, details, we can get a lot of pressure, a lot of information on the page. When it comes to loose drawing, it helps to hold that pencil further away from the tip, holding it closer to the end. And so what that does is it gives us less control. So we can't focus on those details, right? We're setting ourselves up for this really loose drawing, right? Instead of using our fingers to do a lot of the details or our wrist, we'll use our whole arm, right? So it's giving us that kind of loose sketch. So let's say, for example, I'm wanting to draw this paint tube. And I want to do it in a loose drawing. Now, again, I'm not thinking about the details, right? The little circle in the center, the paint mark, putting the letters there. I'm kind of thinking about that overall form. And so doing that loose drawing, that loose kind of sketching, I'll hold my pencil towards the end, and I'll just start kind of moving my hand to kind of get this basic shape, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just kind of, oh, let me press a little harder. It's kind of getting that basic shape. Now, again, I'm not like doing a whole lot of detail with my fingers or my wrist. I'm really just kind of finding those right lines, right? It's kind of getting that base shape. Moving that whole arm. Now you can see, like, my drawing clearly does not look like the paint tube, right? But this is giving me a starter place. So now I have this kind of guideline that I can go into with detail now, and I can hold my pencil like I normally would and focus on finding that right line, right? Getting that detail in there. So this is a really great under drawing, basically, if you're doing any kind of like serious drawing. And like I said, I always start with this loose sketching, this loose drawing, or the gesture drawing to get my my drawing started, any kind of drawing. Even if I'm doing like a painting, whether it's oil or watercolor or whatever, I start with this because it gives me that opportunity to find the right line. Now you see there's a lot of mark making that's happening here. And this is where we can pull in the eraser. You know, I mentioned earlier about how a lot of times we think of eraser as something that helps us fix mistakes, and it's not true. Our eraser, we can use it to draw. It helps us find that right line. So there's nothing wrong with kind of going back through and erasing those marks once we find that right mark. So the next one that I want to mention is that gesture drawing. This is something you use mostly when you're doing like figures. Gesture drawing is similar to the loose drawing, but the purpose is more to capture the movement of your subject. Gesture drawing mainly applies to drawing like the human form or animal form and capturing kind of like action or the pose. Again, it's not something that's focused on detail, right? It's kind of getting that overall shape. It's not about capturing that outline or the form. It really is thinking about kind of that internal structure. And so you can see here that the sketching I have of a figure walking the dog or a figure on a bench reading a paper, it's really basic, but it's helping me kind of find that shape to start building that detail on, that underdrawing, right? And so an example of that, when we hold our pencil, we're definitely going to hold it closer to the tip. We're not going to hold it away like we did for the loose drawing. We're going to hold it a little closer. And so if I'm doing a figure, I'm going to think about that internal structure, right? So let's say, for example, I want to do the gesture drawing of my hand. And so to do that, again, I'm going to hold my pencil kind of closer to the tip and think about that internal structure. I'm not thinking about that outside line of my thumb or my fingers, but I'm thinking about kind of that structure, right? And so it's kind of like building that shape, right? It's not doing that super detail, but it's starting to build that shape up, right? So there's not a lot of detail here, but it gives me that kind of base to start building up, right? One of the things that I do that I really enjoy doing is sitting in a place where there's a lot of like walking traffic, like maybe in a coffee shop or like a cafe or something, and watch people, do some people watching and kind of do sketches that way. Kind of like the figures that I have here, kind of practicing and doing that kind of gestural drawing really does help us like understand form and movement and the way the body, just the way the body moves and bends, right? And so that gesture drawing is really great, kind of starter drawing or like a study for doing like a figure form, also doing animals as well. And both of these drawings, they're not something you spend a lot of time doing. It's that underdrawing. So it's like that beginning sketch, that first step, right? And so you don't want to take a whole lot of time to do it. But once you get there, it'll help you kind of figure out how to make that the right marks, right? It'll help you find that line so you can kind of build that detail up. You are starting like with that basic shape. You're starting with that square, that triangle, or that circle. And you'll see it even more when we get into our discussion of drawing animals and figures. It's easier to start with that basic form and build off of it, that basic shape. So again, it's not that detail. Like in the hand, we're starting with that kind of basic square shape and building it up. You know, I didn't do like the whole finger here. But I focused on that inside where it's bent, where that bone is bent, right? So it's kind of building that inside shape. How would you apply this to a moving subject? If someone is walking in the process of walking, that's even better because it forces you to do it really quickly. So again, you're not thinking about making those mistakes. You're not thinking about like the detail. You're just trying to capture that in the moment. And so an example, I'll show an example. So this is one of my sketchbooks that I have when I was at the Art Institute. And you can see the little figures like walking and moving. You capture them in that moment. It's not about getting the detail like his feet or the hair or anything like that. It's capturing that moment. So you want to do it really quickly. It'll take just a few seconds. You don't get a lot of detail. You get that moment with that gesture drawing. So when there's movement that's happening, you want to capture it like quickly. And so that just, again, that shows you don't spend a lot of time with it. So it kind of forces that idea of making it right and not making mistakes. It kind of forces that out of our mind. And I will say too, I'm not a fan of homework, of course, but drawing is something, it's a practice that definitely needs to be nurtured. And I will say, I used to struggle in my own practice, I used to struggle with drawing hands. And so one way to kind of understand like hands and how to draw them, I just spent time, like I had a whole sketchbook page where I was just moving my hand and doing the gesture drawings of that. And it helped me really understand like how my fingers move, how I can bend my hand and shape it. Like it gave me a better understanding for the shape of my hand by sitting there and doing all those gesture drawings. It really does help. The loose drawing can be nice in itself. It doesn't have to be that underdrawing, but it is so helpful when you're thinking about composition and how you want that figure to be, or like it helps you figure out space like a study. Maybe I don't want my paint to this direction. Maybe I want it facing this direction, so I can kind of test it out these different ways and figure out how I want it to look. So it really helps with planning too. But it can be a beautiful drawing on its own. I love the idea of mixing mediums like that, doing pen and ink drawing and adding that watercolor in. How lovely. Perspective is something that can be a little tricky, but I want to encourage you to kind of follow along with me as we're talking about the different, I guess, details, the different types. We're going to start off talking about 1-point perspective. And 1-point perspective is the really basic. It's like the starter. But there are a few words that I want us to kind of talk about that we'll use in our conversation about perspective. So the first one is that horizon line. We mentioned that before when we were talking about foreshortening, right? And so that horizon line is that mark that shows us where our eye line is, right? It's kind of our vantage point. It's our viewpoint, what we're seeing. So that horizon line can be really high, it can be low, but it's going to be that eye level. When it comes to like landscapes, that horizon line is right where the sky meets the land, right? It's kind of that marking place. So every discussion on perspective will have a horizon line as its starting place, right? So this is that horizon line. Now, the next word I want to talk about is our vanishing point. Now, the vanishing point is the point where something moves so far away from view that it kind of vanishes, right? The vanishing point. And so if we're thinking about like a road, if we think about looking at a road, we can see like the road going off into the distance and kind of disappearing. We don't really see the end of it. It just kind of vanishes in the distance, right? And so the vanishing point is always going to be on that horizon line. If we think about that road doesn't disappear in the sky, right? It's right on that horizon line. So your vanishing point can be anywhere on that horizon line. It can be centered, or it can be off to the side, right? But there's always going to be that vanishing point. So this right here is that vanishing point. Like I said, that vanishing point can be anywhere. It can be centered, it can be off to the side, it can be like, wherever. There's no rules for that. And that horizon line can be at different levels too. Our horizon line can be centered, just like this example is, or it can be low. So we're like looking up at like the top of the room. Or it can be looking down. That horizon line can be really high and we could be looking down. So that horizon line can change. That vantage point, or excuse me, that vanishing point can change as well. There's nothing like set in stone. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the vanishing lines. Now, vanishing lines are kind of the guidelines that help us show perspective. We can see those purple vanishing lines. They all go to that vanishing point, but they help line up whatever image we're drawing, right? It helps guide the shape of our drawing. And so those vanishing lines, this is where that ruler can come in handy. You don't have to use a ruler, but you can, it does help. But all those vanishing lines are going to go through that vanishing point. So you may get something that looks kind of like this. It can be very different, but everything that we draw is going to go through that vanishing point, right? And those are the vanishing lines. That's not something you'll see in a lot of drawings, right? But you'll see, and we'll go through several examples in just a moment, but you'll see how these different artists and how out in nature, you'll see how these vanishing lines really do line up. It helps construct our drawing, right? And so this is kind of the starting point for 1-point perspective. Thinking about that horizon line, our line of sight, that vanishing point where everything kind of lines up to, kind of disappears in that distance. And then those vanishing lines help us line up our space. So this is just kind of an example up close, that 1-point perspective. Again, you can see that horizon line, that dark horizon line, that vanishing point is on that horizon line. This one's centered. And then we have those vanishing lines that kind of guide us to that vanishing point, right? And so an example of seeing this kind of out in nature, or I guess not in nature, in city, is are these two photos here. So you can start to see the lines. You can see these buildings. There's a lot of straight lines here, right? But the truth is, we can see the horizon line here, even though we're looking down on a city, we can see a horizon line and that vanishing point, right? So that horizon line here is that red line. And then that vanishing point happens to be on this center building. And so you can see all these lines, the corners of the building, they line up to this center point, to this vanishing point, right? I think it's a little easier to see with the picture on the right. You can see the lines of the building, right, pointing to that vanishing point, right? It all lines up. And it's because that horizon line is our viewpoint, that's our eye line. And so everything gets directed to what we're seeing. Now, with buildings, it's really easy to see because everything is straight, right? You have straight corners, but with nature, it's a little more complex, but you can still see that vanishing point and that horizon line, right? And so with the trees here, you can see that horizon line, especially with the photo on the left, that horizon line and that vanishing point, it's pretty centered. And all those lines, like the trunks of the tree, all line up with that vanishing point. We can kind of see it in the other photos of trees as well. Even ones that are a little, don't have the trunks as visible as that first one, you can still see how they're lining up to that vanishing point. And even in the one in the bottom as well, that horizon line. And these are all pretty centered. The vanishing point isn't to the side or anything, but you can see how they kind of angle to that vanishing point. It's a little harder to see in nature because we don't have a lot of straight lines, right? It's easier to see in man-made things because we have, like, we can make the lines straight. We can make those buildings straight. We can make those roads straight. But in nature, nothing is really straight. However, when we're looking at these different like vantage points here, this is our horizon line, this is that vanishing point, and we can see that tree, like here on the bottom, this tree is angled out, right? It's going to like the bottom left of the page. And you can see it kind of still, if we were to draw a line from the tip down the center of that tree, it goes to that vanishing point. And the same with that tree on the top right, it's angled to the top right. But if we imagine drawing a line from the tip of the tree through the center, it goes to that vanishing point. If you're looking straight down on them, like with this on the top right here, you can see just the ones that are closest to that vanishing point. You're literally only seeing the very top. We're not seeing the side of that tree at all. But the further away from that horizon line, the further away we go, the more we see. And that's kind of, if we go back to when we were talking about foreshortening, where we like our vantage point when we had that cup or that vase, that vessel, and we were holding it at eye level, we didn't see much, right? We just saw one side. But when we started moving it up or down, we got to see more of that surface. And the same is true here. When we're going away from that eye line, that horizon line, we're going further away from it, you're going to start seeing more of whatever object it is, whether it's a building or a tree. So in a drawing, this is 1 point perspective. This is a painting by Caillebotte. And so you can see like the original drawing on the right, right? And then the drawing on the left, I went ahead and put that horizon line and that vanishing point. And you can see that all the lines in that drawing, they angle back to that vanishing point. So this is kind of that real life example you can see in a painting, how those vanishing lines are used. You don't technically see like where the dog is. The dog is walking towards that vanishing point. You don't see that vanishing point between the dog and, or that vanishing line between the dog and the vanishing point, but you can see that he's angled that direction, right? And even like the bridge doesn't connect all the way to the vanishing point, but you can see that line. If we were to kind of continue that line drawing, it would go to that vanishing point. There are about 3 different ways to look at 1 point perspective, and we're going to kind of walk through that, all 3 of them. So the first one is kind of a bird's eye view, looking down at a cityscape or even looking up at a cityscape. And so I want to start off by drawing kind of my square here. And again, you can follow along with me, take notes if you want. But that this is the space we're going to be working in. And so for the sake of the drawing today, I'm going to make my horizon line right in the center, right? And so this is my horizon line here. And for the sake of our drawing, our discussion today, I'm going to put that vanishing point in the center as well. And so I want to encourage you now to do a couple squares or a couple rectangles. So I'm just going to draw a couple rectangles at different places in my drawing here. Okay, so I've got some 2D shapes here. So when I think about creating that space, that 3D space, I'm going to take the corners of my squares here, my rectangles, and bring them to that vanishing point. So I'm thinking about those vanishing lines and how they're going to give me depth with my rectangles here. And so I'm just going to take those points that are closest to the vanishing point. I'm just going to take with my pencil, bring those lines from those corners to that vanishing point. Right? So now I've got this cube that started, right? I've got a little bit of dimension. I'm going to do that with all my squares. So just take those corners of those squares, of those rectangles, and bring those lines to that vanishing point. Okay. And those are our vanishing lines that we're just kind of connecting. I'm going to do the same with my other rectangle here. So I'm getting some depth here. It looks like I've got a cube that's starting instead of just that 2D shape. It looks like there's volume here. And it's because it's going back to that vanishing point. So when I'm looking at these cubes here, this one, it looks like I'm looking down on it, right? I can see the top and the side. But for this one right here, because it's above that horizon line, it's above my line of sight, it looks like I'm looking up at it. So I don't see the top, I see the bottom, right? So it's starting to appear a little bit three-dimensional. Just for example, what if we have something that is not a square? Maybe I have an L shape here. That we can also get a 3D shape, right? It doesn't have to be that rectangle. So I'm going to take those lines that are closest to that vanishing point and draw those vanishing lines to it. Right? So you can see we're starting to get shape with that as well. Again, it doesn't have to be just a rectangle. Even something that has volume like an L can have depth. It looks like there's a top here and a top here that we're seeing. Or this is a really great setup if we're wanting to do like a square. So I'm going to take my red pencil here really quickly. So I have my square here and my vanishing lines going back to that vanishing point. And so it can kind of give, like I said, this view of looking down, like a bird's eye view where you're looking down on a bunch of buildings or as if you're in a plane. But let's say I wanted to make this a cube. The easiest way to do that is going to be within these vanishing lines. I'm going to make parallel lines to the sides of my box, right? So for the bottom of my box, I'm going to do a parallel line. And that creates the bottom of my box, right? For the side, I'm going to copy my side line and do a parallel line to that straight up and down. Okay. So that even those vanishing lines here, they help me create the volume of that square, right? So I can have this bottom that I'm seeing, and I can have the side. And I've got this little box that's starting to come. So those vanishing lines, not always are they seen in our drawings, right? Part of the vanishing line here was seen because I was using it as the side of my box, right? But the rest of it, it's not going to be seen in that final drawing. I want to talk about kind of a basic landscape view, constructing a simple landscape, right? And so I'm just going to kind of walk through that a little bit, and then we'll look at some real life examples too. So I'm just going to start off by drawing my not completely square as my starting point. And I'm going to draw my horizon line. That horizon line, whenever you start a drawing, figuring out your horizon, where that horizon line is an important first step, right? That helps set up our drawing. And so for this simple landscape, basic landscape that I'm doing, I'm going to, for the purpose of this drawing, I'm going to make my horizon line pretty high. Okay, so I'm not doing it centered, but I'm going to kind of push that horizon line up a little bit. And for the sake of the drawing, I'm going to put my vanishing point in the center as well. So I'm just going to kind of walk through a little landscape and know that this can be changed and edited, of course. But I'm going to start off by thinking about a road. Like I'm standing in the center of the road, like I mentioned earlier, and watching it go to the distance, vanish in the distance. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at that vanishing point and draw my lines, right? So this is my road that's going in the distance, right? Remember those vanishing lines, they start at that center, that vanishing point, and they just kind of angle out, just like our drawing here. They just kind of angle out. And that's how I get my road, right? It's basically those vanishing lines that create the road. Now, if you'll remember our discussion on line earlier, we talked about how when the line is bigger, longer, it appears closer. When the line is smaller, shorter, it appears further away. And so if I'm thinking about the dividing lines in my road, they're going to be further away from me in the distance here. They're going to be really small and really close together. And the closer they come to me, where I am, this is where I'm standing in the center of my road, they're going to be longer and further apart. You may notice that like when you're driving, seeing those dividing lines in the road, they look really big the closer you are to them, but the further away, they're just kind of hard to see. And so to do that kind of realistic, more natural drawing, it'll be those tiny marks that get bigger the further away they go and further apart. So it starts tiny and then gets bigger. And so that's another way of getting distance, right? Now let's say I want to add a house in my landscape. So again, this is very basic, very simple. So I'm going to do just a little house here, right? Now my road looks 3D, but my house here is very 2D. So one way to get depth, to start getting depth for my house, is to think about those vanishing lines again. And so I'm going to take the corners that are closest to that vanishing point and draw a line, that vanishing line to that vanishing point, right? Right. And so that's starting to give me depth, right? Now, again, like in most drawings, you're not going to see in finished drawings, you're not going to see those vanishing lines, but knowing where they are really helps set us up for success. So horizontal lines are going to be the lines that follow along with that vanishing line, right? The vertical lines don't. You can see my vertical lines for my house here straight up and down. They're not pointing back to that vanishing point. And so if I'm doing the back of my house, I'm going to do a vertical line, and I'm going to go in between those vanishing lines here, right? So I'm just going to do an up and down mark here, right? And so one of the things that you'll notice in your drawing, if you're following along, is that I'm closer to the front of the house here than I am to the back here. And so this line is longer than this line, right? The bigger it is, the closer it feels, the smaller it is, the further away it feels. And so that last line is going to be smaller. So these marks, these vertical marks that we're making are going to be like parallel, right? So I'm not making the back of the house, I'm not making that corner like angled in any way. It's going to mimic the front of the house, the marks I made for the front of the house. So they're going to be parallel. And same with the roof, even though my roof is angled here, it's going to be angled here. Okay. This mark on my roof, the back of my roof, that line is going to be smaller than the front because it's going further back. And it's that same idea. The longer the line, the bigger the line, the closer it feels. The shorter the line, the further away it feels. The smaller the line, the further away it feels. And so then what I can do is go along my vanishing lines here and connect those points, those corners. Right? So you can see my house, my very simple house here, kind of goes into the distance. You can see it building space, right? And all those lines still, they go with that road. They kind of mimic that disappearing in the distance, right? And so if I want to, let's say I want to add like a door to the side of my house here, I'm going to follow those same rules, right? My door is going to mimic the lines of my door, going to mimic, like they're going to be parallel to the lines of my house here. And so the one that's closer to me is going to be longer. The one that's further away is going to be a little shorter, right? And so we'll still have that vanishing line coming through, which is how I know that this line is longer and this line is shorter. And so the top of my door will follow along with that vanishing line, right? I know that's a really large door to be on a house, but just for our simple landscape here. So everything lines up to those vanishing lines. And again, this is for a basic drawing. The truth is, when we start doing like actual drawings, there are so many different points of perspective, right? We're going to go into 2-point perspective in a little bit, but this is like that basic, that starter step into perspective, right? And let's say I want to do maybe like trees or a fence along my drawing here. I'll still think about those vanishing lines, right? If I want to do a tree line here, I'll do some vanishing lines here to kind of line that up. And so I'll take, we're doing up and down, right? We're mimicking those shapes. That fence post, let's say I'm doing a fence post. It'll kind of mimic, it'll follow through those vanishing lines. The closer it is to me, the longer it is. The further away it gets, the smaller it gets, and the closer it gets. And so if we look at one of the examples, it kind of illustrates that with trees, our horizon line here, this basic landscape that we talked about, the road, and you can see how the trees that are closer to us are bigger, and the further away they go, the smaller they get. And the same as with figures, like talking about figures in space too. I have an example of like a little square house here, but the figures will change too. They'll go through, the further back they go, the smaller they get. So if I want this fence post to feel like it's bigger and closer, I can make it thicker, right? And just kind of make it thinner as it goes further back. And it'll give it, it's another way to make it feel like the thicker lines, the darker lines are closer, the bigger lines are closer, and the lighter lines get further away. And we can see that in our landscapes too. And we'll talk more about that with atmospheric perspective. But like if you're looking out, like if you're looking out through the room or a landscape, the stuff that's closer to you is darker, right? The stuff that's further away, we see less detail. So we don't see like, the knots in the fence post or like how crooked it is or whatever. You don't see those details back here. You see that the closer it is to you. So when we're doing, like, we're looking at something, we're looking straight on that house, like if we see that house straight on, those lines are going to be straight up and down, right? The same with those fence posts, right? Those fence posts are going to be straight up and down. So even though those vanishing lines look like they're angling and we want to kind of make them, like it's natural for us to want to make that mark going out like this, at that angle, we're still going to make them up and down because that's how they're in the ground. That's how we're seeing them. So it's just kind of adjusting our thinking a little bit. We're going to talk about room interior for just a little bit. So this image may be familiar. If you're in Chicago, you may have seen it. It's one of Van Gogh's bedrooms. And so this is a great example of an interior drawing that uses perspective. And I will say Van Gogh often uses this perspective, 1-point perspective, in a lot of his paintings. So if you're looking at his work, sometimes it's pretty easy to find that horizon line and vanishing point. And so you can see in the drawing on the right, that red line is that horizon line, right? And then that blue dot is the vanishing point. And you can see how those vanishing lines, those blue vanishing lines, help line up a lot of what he's drawing. Looking at the bed, the chairs, even the door on the right, you can see how those vanishing lines really kind of line up with that, right? So we can tell, because that horizon line is pretty high up, we can tell he's looking down in this room. We're seeing most of the floor and most of the tops of a lot of the surfaces, right? But this is just a great example, of great visual of the perspective, 1-point perspective in a space. One of the things I want to point out about this drawing when we're talking about room interiors is the back wall. So here we can see the back wall that he's painted. And one thing I want to point out, really spotlight, is that the images that he's painted on the back, like the mirror and the picture frame, and even that those knobs, posts, they don't follow the vanishing lines. You can see that it's pretty square. That mirror and that picture frame especially, it's square. They're not following those vanishing lines. And that's because that's that back wall. Everything, when we talk about interior rooms, interior spaces, and it comes to perspective, that back wall is not going to follow those lines. They're not going to follow those lines at all. They're going to be flat. And that's because that's that end flat wall. And so everything that's on the side walls and the floor and the ceiling, those are all going to follow those vanishing lines. And so when we do an interior drawing with 1-point perspective, it's good to remember that that back wall doesn't follow that rule, right? It's going to be like the mirrors, that picture frame, they're going to look square. Perspective is complex. It's a really complex subject. And I will say, when I was learning perspective, it took me forever. And then finally, there was one point where it's just like all the pieces clicked into place, and it was like, oh. And so if it's feeling a little tricky or a little out of reach, I just want to encourage you to be gentle with yourself and just to keep practicing it. Because the more you practice it, the more your hand does it, the more comfortable you'll feel, the more you'll be able to kind of see it. And also observation, just like noticing it when you're in a space, kind of helps with that too. And let's kind of create our own. I know it helps to really kind of draw it out. So we're going to kind of draw it out together and get a deeper understanding. So doing that interior space, I'm going to go ahead and do just like I did for my other perspective drawings. I'm going to start off by drawing that square, right? One of the things that can be really helpful when it comes to perspective is for perspective drawings is having a ruler. You don't have to use the ruler, but it does kind of help a little bit. The next thing I'm going to draw is my horizon line and my vanishing point. And those are two very important, just like everything else. Those are the two of the first things that we kind of want to set up when we do our perspective drawing. And so for the purpose of this drawing, I'm going to make the horizon line centered and that vanishing point centered. Okay. So our next step is to figure out that back wall. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my ruler and just kind of do an X. I'm going from corner to corner, but I'm going through that vanishing point, right? So I'm just going to kind of draw those lines. And what this does, these are vanishing lines for sure, but they kind of help set up our square, that back wall. And those side walls. So now to do my back wall, I'm just going to kind of connect those. I'm making parallel lines from the top of my box here to do the top of the back wall, the bottom of that back wall, and the sides. So do a very simple or basic, a very basic 1-point interior, perspective interior. We've got basically our room that we're looking in. This is our back wall. This is our ceiling, our sides, and our flooring. So let's go ahead. I'm going to talk about doing some vanishing lines really quickly. So let's say I want to add a door over to this wall here. So one of the things that I'm going to do, I'm going to still follow along with those vanishing lines, right? And create even more. So when I'm creating the sides, like the vertical lines to my door, I'm going to make sure it's parallel to that back wall. Those marks are parallel, right? So let's say my door is right here. That's one wall. I'm going to take my ruler, and you don't have to use a ruler, but I'm going to create a vanishing line coming from that vanishing point, touching the top of my door frame. So when I do the other side of my door, I'm doing that parallel line. Those sides are going to be straight up and down vertical, but you can see that one side is longer than the other, right? And that's because everything that we're looking at, everything in that room is going back to that vanishing point. It's kind of lining up, right? And we've talked about, if you'll remember when we were talking about line, the line that is longer is closer to us, gives that feeling of being closer. The line that's shorter gives that feeling of being further away, right? And so that's the case with the door. One side of the door, we know, our brain knows that the door, both sides of the door are the same size. It's just when we're looking at it to give that illusion that one side of the door is closer, we make one side longer. But you see it lines up with those vanishing lines, right? So when I do my drawing of my door, right? You can see it lines up with those vanishing lines, right? So I can put my doorknob here. The same is true when it comes to creating a window or a picture frame or a mirror. Let's say I want to add a window on this wall over here. I'm going to kind of follow through with that too. We're still doing vertical lines. Those vertical lines are the same, right? So let's say I want a pretty big window here. I'm going to make my first mark vertical up and down. And then just kind of to that vanishing line to the top. And I'm drawing really dark lines, so it's a little easier to see on camera. But your marks don't have to be, your vanishing lines don't have to be that dark. But you can see I have my vanishing lines lined up with that one side of the window. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do another vertical line. And these are the sides of that window. So when I connect those vanishing lines to those lines, I've got a nice square. The main thing to remember when it comes to one-point perspective is that the vertical lines are they're always going to be straight up and down, right? It's those horizontal lines that are going to go to that vanishing point. Those are the ones that are going to be angled, right? So drawing this window here, the sides of the window are straight up and down. It's the bottom and the top that are kind of angled a little bit. So now I can do like the inside of my window. And that's even true, like if you're wanting to build a frame around your window, you can still like create those vanishing lines to kind of help set that up, right? So let's say I want a little frame around my window here. I'm just going to draw those vanishing lines. And you can see they're angled still. My outside frame follows those vanishing lines. You can see with my window frame that I did, that one side, this side of my window frame is wider than this side, right? The side that's closer to me is wider. And that kind of goes back to when we were talking about line too. We talked about how when the line value or the line width, when it's wider, it feels closer. When it's narrower, smaller, it's further away. And so even in this room, even in this small space, it applies, right? So that frame for the window, this one's going to be wider than the other side because this one's closer. Right? So it's kind of giving us that illusion. Now, when it comes to like that ceiling, let's say we want a light, we're still going to use those parallel lines, right? So because it's on our ceiling, we've done the sides, right? So for the side walls, anything that was vertical is going to be straight up and down. Right? It's those horizontal lines that are angled. Now, when it comes to doing the ceiling and the floor, it's the opposite, right? So the horizontal lines are going to be straight. Let's say we're doing a light up in our ceiling. So I'm going to do a really like a parallel line that goes with the ceiling, right? It's going to be straight across. So I'll take my my ruler And I'm just gonna do some more vanishing lines here to line up with my mark. Okay. So that horizontal line for that ceiling, that horizontal line is going to be straight across. So I've got this big light fixture, but the sides of the light, that's what's going to be angled. And the same with the floor. So the sides, for the walls of our drawing, that horizontal line is angled. For the ceiling and the floor, the vertical lines are angled. And again, it's what's helped giving us depth, right? That feeling of depth. So the line that's closer to us is longer. The line that's further away is smaller. So let's say we're doing a rug on our floor, okay? So again, it's going to be kind of set up that same way, right? So we'll have the vertical lines are the ones that are going to be angled, and those horizontal lines are straight. So if I'm doing a little rug on my floor here, I'll have that parallel line to the floor, the bottom of the wall, and just do those vanishing lines to give me that shape. So again, the top and bottom of that rug are different lengths, right? The one that's closest to me is longer. The one that's further away from me is shorter. And again, the sides of that rug are what's angled. Now, if you're wanting to do something like a wooden floor, you're going to follow those vanishing lines as well. Doing something that like the wood, slats of wood, right? So because this is centered, I'm doing one straight down, but I'm going at an angle, slightly changing it. Oh. So you can see it gives this kind of feel of wood paneling, just kind of moving those vanishing lines. Okay. And so that actually, if I'm doing a wooden floor, again, I'm not following through my rug because it's underneath, but you can see those vanishing lines help give that illusion. But you'll notice again that what's closer to me is longer than what's further away. Right? So the further back it is, the shorter it is, the smaller, the narrower. And then when it comes to things like that back wall, like if we're looking at that Van Gogh bedroom drawing again, that back wall is going to completely ignore all these vanishing lines, right? Especially if it's centered like this. So if I'm doing a window on my back wall, they're going to be all these straight lines because I'm looking straight at it, right? No angles. So for this interior space, you can see like I've got a sofa set up here and kind of like a little end table. So if I'm doing, let's say I'm doing, instead of it being an angled end of the sofa, I want it to be rounded. I'm still following those vanishing lines, but I'm paying attention to that round, like making that rounded shape. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to follow these vanishing lines that I have laid out here, and I'm just going to kind of round that shape, right? And do it on both sides. But I can do that over here as well. Just make sure I'm mirroring those rounded shapes. So it doesn't have to be super angled, right? It doesn't have to come to a point, but you're still following those vanishing lines. That angle is going to change depending on where, like for the sofa, where that is in the room. So for this interior space, if I were drawing like a rounded like side table here, I would start off, what helps me is starting off with that square. So following those vanishing lines still doing that kind of like parallel mark. I'm drawing on the handout here. Parallel mark following those vanishing lines, and then create my circle following that inside that square. So even those like guidelines for that square, I'm going to end up knocking off, like that's not going to be in the final drawing. But by drawing that square as a starter place, it kind of helps me figure out that circular shape. So when I pull off, like erase that square, I'll have that circle that fits into that vanishing, those vanishing lines, right? So that circle, you'll see it where it's like the further away it is, the smaller it is, and the closer to me, the wider it is. Doing that tabletop, I did that square first to help give me that circle shape. And so if I were going down, one trick I would use is by still using that square, those straight lines to start off. So I would come straight down, following those vanishing lines.
Right.
And that would kind of help give me that space set up, because that would give me the angle, the corner. There's no corner to a round space, but it would help show me where that corner is, especially for the part I'm looking at. Your eraser is not bad. It's not erasing mistakes. Your eraser is helping you find those right lines, right? The right lines. And so it's okay to like erase once you do that square. It's okay to erase that off once you get that circle in there. Erasing is not bad. So make as many marks as you need to help you find that right line. Let's talk a little bit about 2-point perspective here. So dew point perspective, it has the same, basically the same things that 1-point perspective has. We have our horizon line, we have the vanishing lines, we have the vanishing points. But the difference is that there are multiple vanishing points, right? So you can see here, I have 2 vanishing points, right? And those vanishing lines are coming from both of them. And that's kind of like how we're setting up that 2-point perspective. So if you are looking at a row of buildings, this is something that will be helpful, right? Finding that 2-point perspective. And so here's an example of that in a painting, Caillebotte painting, the Rainy Day in Paris, or Paris Street Rainy Day. He's using 2-point perspective, and we can really see it with this building here. And so in the draw or the painting on the right, we can see that's all based off that one horizon line, right? But the vanishing points they're multiple, but it's still on that horizon line. And so if we look at the points here, right? Those vanishing points, those vanishing lines for each side of that building. So on the left side of the building, those lines go to that left vanishing point. The right side of the building, those lines where the windows are and the doors, they go to that right vanishing point. You can see that pretty easily or pretty clearly here. And I will say, like, he's using other point perspectives too when you start looking at these other buildings, but with this vanishing point here, you can see that sidewalk lines up to that, right? The side of the building that's closest to us, those lines line up to that vanishing point here, vanishing lines, right? So you can see he's using this skill too to create his drawing or painting. I keep saying drawing, but I mean painting here. And so it's just kind of adding that extra, helping you add more depth, right? Getting more natural or realistic in our drawings. And it's just like a great example here how that's laid out. So if we're really diving into this picture, right, then these tiles, that's going to be kind of further away. So the vanishing point for the tile here is actually going to be off the page. And that's that I mentioned that earlier too, that not all vanishing points are going to be in our drawing, right? They're going to be off that page. And it's because of the angles we're looking at, right? And this is where observation happens too. Like I'm sure he was paying attention to when he was painting this, or at least doing the studies for this painting, the beginning sketches for this painting studies. He was paying attention to how that tile looked, those stones looked on that street. But you can also see like the difference, like on the page at the bottom of it, these stones are a little bigger than these here. But the further away they get, the closer they get to that horizon line, the smaller they get too. So we can see here that horizon line, there's one horizon line still, right? This is our eye level, right? And so those vanishing points are going to be somewhere on that horizon line. And you can see as I'm drawing, or as I drew these vanishing lines going through that vanishing point, it helped me set up these boxes, right? And again, like I want to go back to what I said, mentioned earlier, when there's something that is above, like the horizon line, like we're looking up at it, we'll see the bottom of it. If we're looking down at it, we're going to see the top. And you can see that in real life. Like if you have a cup with you, a coffee cup, like I have, if I have it above my head, above my eye line, I see the bottom of the coffee cup. If I have it below my eye line, I see the top of the coffee cup. I don't see the bottom. And so when you're drawing, it's kind of, it follows those same rules, right? If you're looking down on it, you're going to see the top of it. If you're looking up at it, you're going to see the bottom. And so this is kind of helpful, like when you start to draw like a cityscape, right? And so I'm just going to kind of move up a little bit in our drawing. So here I'm looking up at these buildings, right? And so I can see, I don't see the top, right? But I'm following those vanishing lines to kind of create that top shape for me. Even though I'm not seeing the top, it's kind of setting it up for me. The big difference when it comes to like more like 2-point perspective specifically, between 2-point and 1-point perspective is the number of vanishing lines, right? And then there's this added element of a vertical line, right? And so you can see in this drawing here, that vertical line is the edge, right? It's showing me the edge of things. So when I'm adding more buildings, there's going to be several vertical lines here that'll show me my edge. And that vertical line is where those vanishing lines cross. And let's kind of create our own. We start off with our horizon line, figuring out where that horizon line is. Okay, so for our drawing today, I'm just going to draw just a really simple horizon line. The horizon line is kind of the viewer's eye line, right? It helps us figure out our vantage point. Are we looking up at something? Are we looking down at something? That horizon line is a really great first step when setting up our drawing, setting up perspective. The next thing are the vanishing points. So this is the horizon line. And the vanishing points. So those vanishing points are the points where something moves so far away from view that it kind of vanishes in the distance. We talked about 1-point perspective, how it only has one vanishing point. 2-point perspective has two. And so just for the sake of this drawing, I'm going to put one vanishing point here and one vanishing point here. Now, when it comes to thinking about perspective, we are going very basic, talking about 1-point and 2-point perspective. The truth is, when you're drawing real to life, there are so many points perspective added into it. But this is just kind of that basic starter, right? And so when we're talking about 2-point perspective, just like I said, we're kind of following along 1-point perspective, the same terms. We have that horizon line. We have those vanishing points. We have 2 vanishing points. And then we have those vanishing lines. And those vanishing lines, just like in 1-point perspective, those vanishing lines are those guiding lines that help us show perspective. They're not something that's necessarily seen in the drawing or painting, but it's important to think about those things when we're lining up our drawing. And so those vanishing lines will come from those vanishing points. So in 1-point perspective, we only had one vanishing point and all those vanishing lines came through it. When you have 2-point perspective, those vanishing points, those vanishing points, you'll have vanishing lines going through each of those. So for example, my vanishing points here, I have some vanishing lines that maybe go like this. Right? And then maybe come down. They're going through that vanishing point, right? But I also have them going through my other vanishing point. So I have those vanishing lines coming across. Okay. So one thing that's different other than the two vanishing points. One thing that's different when we talk about 2-point perspective is that there's something called a vertical line, and this shows the edge of what we're looking at. And you'll see there are vertical lines that are going up and down on either side of these boxes, right? That's showing us the edge. If we're doing something like a cityscape here, you'll see you have that vertical line that shows the edge of those buildings. The vertical lines are where those vanishing lines intersect, right? And so one would be right here, right? Because we can see those vanishing lines intersecting. And then I'm going to continue my drawing out this way because I realized I didn't draw those lines far enough. Right? And so they're where those vanishing lines intersect. And that's going to be kind of how we set up like a drawing, like if we're doing a building or a box. Let's say I'm drawing a box here. You'll use those intersecting vanishing lines to help set up that box. So I'm going to use one of those vanishing lines right here at that intersection. And I'm just going to kind of follow it to make that box shape, right? We can see that starting to form, and we can kind of follow that through, bringing it down, still following those vanishing lines, right? So we've got our sides that kind of line up here. We have one side, and we have the bottom. You're following those vanishing lines to create the sides and the tops, and that vertical line is showing those edges. You can continue that drawing on, figuring out how to draw these boxes. And one of the things that I want to point out is your perspective when you're looking at it. So when you're looking above, just like this box here, when you're looking above, you're seeing underneath the box, right? You're not seeing the top of it. And the same thing if you had like your coffee cup, right? And your coffee cup, you were holding it above you, you wouldn't be able to see the inside of the coffee cup, right? You're seeing the bottom. And so that's kind of like, that's the same thing here, right? And the same with the bottom box. You know, when you're looking down, you're seeing the top of something, you're not seeing the bottom of it. And so if I'm looking down at my coffee cup, I'm going to be able to see inside my coffee cup. I won't be able to see the bottom of it, just like this box. And so that's kind of how we use that 2-point perspective to kind of set up something like this, especially when you're doing that cityscape, right? And so thinking about a cityscape, just like some of our examples here, you can see we're using those vanishing lines again to help us kind of line up the top of those buildings, right? And to kind of set up that city, to start with that city. So let's say I'm wanting to do a cityscape here. I'll do my horizon line. And then the 2-point perspective. I will say sometimes those vanishing points won't always be in the picture, right? So let's say I'm drawing a cityscape here in my square. I have one vanishing point here. I'm going to make my other vanishing point here. It doesn't have to be in my picture, but knowing where that vanishing point is does help us set up our cityscape, our building, right? And so then we can just add those vanishing lines. And so I'm just going to really simply draw some vanishing lines here. They're going to go through each of those vanishing points. And this is going to help me set up my cityscape. Just going to do about just a few lines here. And the same on both my vanishing points. And if you're following along, just go ahead and do that as well. Again, we're just kind of drawing some of those vanishing lines to kind of help set up our cityscape. And you're already noticing how, like with mine, you can see where they're intersecting right along that mark, right? That vertical line is starting to show. Okay. So if I'm looking at my cityscape here, I've got some vanishing lines that are going above my horizon line and some vanishing lines that are going below my horizon line. And you can see that vertical line is where those marks are kind of intersecting, right? So it's right up and down. Hmm. And even if they're not intersecting at that point, or it looks like it, that just means that you don't have that exact line, vanishing lines lined up. But anyway, focusing on like building that cityscape, each building that you do is going to have a different vertical line. So if I'm doing two buildings here, I'm going to have two vertical lines, right? Because two buildings have the two edges, right? And so I will just kind of follow along with those vanishing lines, creating the top of my building and coming down for the bottom of my building. And that first vertical line creates that edge, right? Now, because we're looking at a building, we're not going to see the bottom or the top, right? So we're just going to see those outside shapes. We're basically seeing only two walls, right? And if we're doing a second building with it, we'll set that up the same way, right? We're still having those two vanishing points, right? Building our cityscape here. But we're going to have those same lines, right? That we're setting up. Still following those lines. So with my building here, you can see the tops of my building. I've got it lined up on that same vanishing line. The bottom of my building, it's going to be that same, still lined up with that same vanishing line. Yep. So we still have that vertical line, that's that edge, okay? The vertical line making those edges. So we're building that cityscape, right? You can make those buildings closer, further apart. I can do one way over here, but I'm still using those same vanishing lines to build that. I know that this can feel a little complicated, but it's one of those things like the more you notice, like if you're around a bunch of buildings, you're noticing that perspective and those vanishing lines, the more you try it out, the more it does make sense. And you can see like those vanishing lines, they're not necessarily in the image. There's only part of them that are staying, right? Those vanishing lines that help make up those buildings. And the truth is, when we start doing those vanishing lines, they're going to tell us where like the windows are in the building. They'll help us set up. Atmospheric perspective. These are just a couple images that I drew kind of quickly, but to help illustrate atmospheric perspective. So when you are looking at a landscape, you know, we did our simple landscape drawing last time, where we drew the road with 1 point perspective. We drew that kind of building with 1 point perspective. But when you're looking at landscapes, let's say you're looking out at this wide field and you've got a mountain range back there, it doesn't follow along with the 1 point, 2 point perspective view. And so this atmospheric perspective is really how it kind of talks about the effect of atmosphere on the appearance of objects, basically. And so whether you're doing black and white, like this image up here, or color, like I have over here, this rule kind of applies, right? And so objects that are closer to us, we're going to see more detail, right? It's easier to see because we're closer, so we can see those details. The colors are going to be brighter, bolder. You're going to see the darkest darks and the lightest lights. Like I said, the most detail. And typically that's towards the bottom of the page. As we talked about several weeks ago, when something is we're wanting to make it appear closer to us. We use the darker colors. We have it lower to the page. We make it wider, right? We were talking about lines when we talked about that. And that applies here as well. And so you can see in both of these images, in the color and in the black and white, that the darkest darks are right along the bottom. And that's to give the illusion that it's closer to us. Now, if something is, we want to give the idea that something is further away, still going back to line, we talked about how it's lighter, it's thinner, and it gives the appearance that it's further away. And so you can see in the background of each of these drawings, the color and the black and white, as it goes further back, the colors get muted. Right? They're not as bold, they kind of fade. And we know that, I know we know that when we look out at, let's say we're looking on the back porch at this beautiful mountain range, you're going to see what's closer to you more clearly, right? You'll see most of those details. And as you look further out, we see less and less details. And so this is a great way to kind of express that in a drawing, thinking about this. So you can see, again, like with the color, I have my darkest darks, my lightest lights here, the most detail here. And as it goes further back, right, we're getting less and less detail. And eventually those mountains that I have back here, they're really just basically one color because they're getting further and further away. And like I said, this works for color, this works for black and white, but objects, again, objects that are further away, they are faded, less saturated, less detailed. Things that are closer to us are going to be refined a little more. There's going to be more detail, more color, more bold, more saturation. You'll be able to see everything clearer. I know that, like in our mind, we know that like trees have individual leaves, right? They're not just this big mass, one big mass on top of a trunk. And so like, you know, when you're thinking about doing a landscape like this, a lot of times you're not right. Like here where I have the trees, you're not seeing a lot of those individual leaves. And it's because it's further away. You're not seeing those details. The further away it gets, the less detail we see. Now, if the tree were right up here, super close, right up here along this line here, you'd start to see the bark. You may start to see the leaves because it's closer to us and we get more detail that way. If any questions come up, again, always feel free to email us at our Contact That Matter email or message us on our Facebook page. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. We'll see you soon.